So this is our TOK presentation. It's on the development of ethical standards, and it's by Annie DiGiuseppe and Chloe Cooper.
So our real life situation is um about this one time that I was going over to Annie's house, and as I pull up to her house, I just see this lady rifling through people's recycling bins and taking out all the bottles and cans and putting it in her personal storage bag of all the collected cans and bottles. And so it's an ethical standard of Annie's neighborhood to allow this woman to go through everyone's recycling. And even though this seems like a controversial phenomenon, no one in Annie's neighborhood actually has talked to this lady about it and confronted her about it. So they're just kind of enabling her, I guess. But it's an ethical standard of Annie's neighborhood to allow this woman to go through everyone's recycling. And ethical knowledge and standards are developed through ways of knowing. The most more specifically in this situation, we're using emotion and reason.
So the knowledge question that we have composed from here is, what role does emotion and reason play in the composition of ethical standards? And to answer this, we will be looking at how different ways of knowing impact emotional and rational responses to ethical situations.
So first, we're going to look at how memory affects people's emotional responses to ethical situation. So memory draws upon personal knowledge, and if people have personal knowledge based on their memory of a specific ethical situation, their emotional response will be biased towards feeling the way that they felt in the past, like PTSD or stressful emotional experiences associated with an ethical situation. So it results in emotional bias in one's reaction. So specifically at a concert one time, me, Chloe, I cut in line to be with my friends, and everyone surrounding us in the line got really mad and publicly scrutinized us, and it was just really shameful, and I had to walk to the back of the line, and it was really traumatizing, and I haven't cut in line since. But my memory of this experience and the emotional trauma has now impacted my choices that I now make when regarding ethical standards. And this stressful and emotional experience resulted in my visceral ethical bias.
So a counterclaim to this, in that memory impacts emotion, which impacts your view on ethical standards, is that some ethical situations are very specific. So not everyone has memories to aid or create a bias towards their responses. And one of an example for me personally is my view on wolf dogs, which does seem like a random example, and I do not have any memory or experiences of them. But I'm using my intuition, which is another way of knowing that is not memory. Um, in that it seems cruel to keep like a large half feral creature just cooped up in a house. And my reason, obviously they are half wild animal. They have wolf in them, which is kind of scary. And that dictates my ethical response to their existence as domestic pets, which I just don't agree with, but this has nothing to do with my memory. And even though I do not have a memory to rely on, I can subconsciously utilize other ways of knowing to formulate an ethical standard. So, memory, even though it is important, it's still very easy and possible to have a quick response to any ethical issue without it.
So next we're going to look at how sensory perception, a different way of knowing, also affects emotion when in the composition of uh, ethical standards. And so sensory perception is ingrained in humans biologically with our senses. And specifically, um, at the Woodstock a festival in 1999. There were many tragic incidents um, during the performance of this band called Limp Bizkit. And there was lots of violence, rape, and vandalism, all from the lead singer of the band provoking the crowd, telling the concert goers to take all of their negative energy and, quote, put it the F out, end quote. Um, this created a type of hive mind mentality where everyone's collective excitement, anger, and overall energy just really saturated the crowd with aggressive emotions from their sensory perception at the time, and their shared anger only amplified more and more and immediately just let their emotions of anger and frustration determine their ethical stance and decisions that they made, which there it was violence, rape, and vandalism, clearly. And most people would consider this to be a general ethical standard to not cause destruction, vandalism, or rape, but it was a really intense sensory perception of the collective crowd and their ability to see other people that felt the same touching each other because they were in a crowded place and sensing the palpable energy of the crowd that where the ethical standard changed the result of their emotion.
All right. And sensory perception can also work against emotion in some cases, and there is a pretty specific example of that. So some senses have lesser roles in creating emotion. That would be, for example, like um, touch. It's not quite as powerful as
Per
something
se, like
like
sight.
taste
Yeah.
or sight. And in the case of taste, it actually, um, while it does impact people's feelings of pleasure and disgust, it does not always impact emotion in an ethical manner. So the sensory perception of taste can create so much pleasure so that the emotional aspect of its production is blatantly ignored or just purposely disregarded. And that example is shown in people's enjoyment of the taste of meat. So I would argue, and it does seem to be pretty obvious, that there's just this moral intuition that people don't like the idea of things being slaughtered. Um, and very few people would actually be willing to kill the animal. And most people aren't even willing to look at pictures or videos of what goes down in slaughterhouses. But because they like the taste of meat, this what is inherently unethical to us is accepted as an ethical standard. And it doesn't really even coincide with our inherent ethics, our inherent sadness and disgust towards like the brutal slaughter of another living creature. And this is pretty much just an example of people allowing their sensory perception to overwhelm or take priority over their emotions. Like they're basically turning off their emotions because they are enjoying their sensory perception too much. And that just results in a pretty skewed ethical stance.
So, next we're going to talk about how memory also affects reason in the composition of ethical standards. So, here we want to talk about how memory comes from a lot of shared knowledge, and specifically this can come from classes and just previous knowledge from an educational experience. Like for me, when I took AP Environmental Science, this led me to go vegan because I was learning about the harmful effects of agriculture to the environment in my science class. So I couldn't deny my reasoning from this indisputable and factual shared knowledge. And I made my ethical choice to go vegan and not support the animal agriculture industry, which is filled with abuse, rape, and of course slaughter, based off of my memory from the knowledge that my teacher gave me in my class. And this made for a really easy, ethically based decision because my memory never fails to remind me what I learned in this class, which is always reminding me of my reason to go vegan.
And a counterclaim for memory's impact on reason is that sometimes memories of shared knowledge are not always just an easy pass through reason to make ethical decisions. So, this would be an example of events or phenomena that are just controversial by nature, sort of the things that no society doesn't have a clear ethical stance towards, and you can just expect many different opinions about the same thing. And so I have very many memories of having the discussion about America's decision to drop the atomic bombs on Japan in history classes throughout the years. Um, and despite this being talked about so often, I've never heard a clear majority answer from everybody. It's way more often than not that everybody has very different views. It's because it is a naturally controversial topic. And it's really hard to reason out an ethical stance based on memory alone because of this, because I don't have just simply having the memory of learning about it in history class and not really being able to have any other ways of knowing to fall back on because reason would be hard to it would be hard to reason without any other ways of knowing um involved in this. And so this makes and as well as just knowing that it is a naturally controversial subject and that there are a lot of varying ethical views, makes the issue very convoluted. And for me personally, I've never been able to have a clear ethical stance on this issue, because I really only have memories of learning about it in history class, and that was just never enough for me to develop an ethical standard.
Okay, so now we're going to look at how sensory perception affects reason. So, sensory perception can very often verify reason, like specifically the sight, smell, and sound of big trucks that emit just this large quantity of smog, just going straight to air pollution. And it naturally just looks like it would be bad for the environment because we can see it with our eyes and it just like we know. And this perception ignites, validates our ability to reason that these trucks are environmentally unethical. And seeing and smelling and hearing all the negative impacts that these trucks produce verifies someone's reasoning behind the ethical standard to make more environmentally conscious decisions. And before even attaining the knowledge necessary to reason that these huge trucks are bad for the environment, many can agree that someone's initial response to this really just ethically alarming situation stems from their sensory perception. For me, when I was a kid, I would take so many long road trips with my family, and this was before I was aware of like the harmful effects of the smog, but just by passing by and seeing the site of this, um, I just have a really vivid memory of just knowing that this was a very environmentally unethical thing. And also there's like calling smog hotlines where it's kind of like you see something, you need to say something and take an ethical action towards bettering this.
All right, so a counterclaim to sensory perception's impact on reason is that this same ability to see, smell, hear, etc., just sense things, also allows for the creation of stereotypes. And stereotypes are based on shared knowledge. There's sort of just this list of cookie cutter character traits that society uses to characterize people and basically label them as something. And there really is no